usually, when we think about achieving a really high level of success, right, whether that's in a university setting or like climbing the ladder in a corporate job, there's this implicit expectation of a clearly marked path.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
It's basically like following a really complex, super demanding recipe.
Mhm.
You gather the exact ingredients, you follow the steps meticulously, and if you execute it perfectly, you get the five-star dish,
Right.
you get the A+ on the transcript, you get the promotion.
Because the metrics for success in those environments, they're kind of handed to you on a silver platter. It's a
Yeah.
structured reality.
Exactly.
Your only responsibility is to just, you know, perform within the established boundaries. If you do the work, you get the reward.
But then you step into the world of doctoral research, and suddenly that recipe book is completely gone. Like the kitchen is empty, the ingredients aren't even labeled. We're looking at an environment that is entirely formless.
It is the absolute definition of an unstructured wilderness. And for people who have spent their entire lives perfecting the art of, like, following the recipe, that sudden absence of structure is just completely disorienting.
Yeah.
I mean, it triggers a profound psychological shock.
Which brings us to today. Welcome to this deep dive. Our mission today is to unpack a masterclass script by Dr. Arup Giri, and it's titled The First 100 Days of Your PhD.
A great piece.
It really is. And the goal over the next few minutes is to extract a step-by-step roadmap for surviving and, thriving during that monumental transition into doctoral research.
Absolutely.
And I want to say right up front to you, the listener, whether you are prepping for your own PhD, catching up on academic culture, or you're just insanely curious about how high-level research is actually managed behind the scenes, this deep dive is going to give you a massive advantage.
Oh, without a doubt.
Because we are fundamentally looking at a masterclass in tackling any massive unstructured project.
Yeah, the principles required to navigate the first 100 days of a PhD are, well, they're the exact same principles required to launch a startup, or write a novel, or lead a completely novel corporate initiative.
Right.
The stakes are just as high, and the lack of a map is just as terrifying.
Okay, let's unpack this. There is a massive mindset shift that has to happen almost immediately upon entering a doctoral program. For a student coming straight from an undergrad or a master's degree, the first reality check is that grades are now largely irrelevant.
Yeah, they don't matter anymore.
Right. This isn't just more schooling. It's essentially a scientific apprenticeship. The core concept here is moving from what's known as the inner loop to the outer loop.
And that distinction is the linchpin of everything that follows.
Yeah.
I mean, the inner loop is what you've been doing your whole life.
Right, like K-12 education.
Exactly. K through 12, and even through a master's degree. Someone else has already identified the problem. A teacher or professor framed it, put it on a syllabus, and just handed it to you. Your job was simply finding the solution, using the tools they provided. A PhD, however, forces you into the outer loop.
And in the outer loop, there's no assigned problem.
Nope. Zero. Your primary job is to survey a vast landscape of the unknown, figure out which problems are actually worth solving in the first place, and then, and this is key, determine which of those are actually ripe for an attack given current technology.
So it's like being a brilliant line cook who has spent years flawlessly executing other people's recipes, and suddenly you're told to step out of the kitchen, walk around the neighborhood, analyze the local culture, study the supply chain, and invent a completely original restaurant menu from scratch.
That is the perfect way to visualize it. I mean, think about why this shift is so psychologically jarring for high achievers.
Because they've never done it before.
Right, and these are individuals who have been conditioned, chemically rewarded with dopamine, honestly, for inner loop success for 20-plus years.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
They're addicted to the rubric. They want to be told what the test is so they can ace it. When you drop them into the outer loop where there is no test, no syllabus, and no immediate validation, they freeze.
They just panic.
Exactly. They keep looking for the recipe in a kitchen that doesn't have one. And that paralysis, it can last for years if it isn't addressed in month one.
So to invent that completely original menu without freezing up, you desperately need to understand the head chef who owns the restaurant.
Yes.
Which means navigating the void requires a guide. So the most critical task of your first month is managing your supervisor.
Yeah, the relationship with your supervisor is basically the foundational pillar of the entire operation.
Right.
It's a symbiotic relationship. You both have goals, and you both have careers to build. But the student has to take the initiative to establish the working dynamic, like the modus operandi.
And the mechanics of setting this up, according to the source, are surprisingly granular. Like in those first few weeks, you have to formally agree on meeting frequency and location. You have to nail down how communication is going to work when the supervisor is traveling or inevitably absent.
Which happens a lot.
Yeah. And you have to agree on exact feedback styles, like do they want bullet points? Do they want full drafts? And beyond the logistics, you have to deeply understand your supervisor's incentive structures, like are they pre-tenure or post-tenure?
Which is huge. Understanding where your supervisor sits on the academic ladder changes everything about your day-to-day life.
How so?
Well, if you have a younger pre-tenure faculty member as your supervisor, they are fighting for their academic life.
Oh, right, because they need publications to secure tenure.
Exactly.
Mm.
Their career literally depends on your output. Because of that immense pressure, they're going to be highly hands-on. They might literally be sitting next to you, checking your code line by line, reviewing raw data, and pushing you incredibly hard.
Right. And if they are post-tenure, I mean, they've already secured their position, right?
Yeah, they've built their empire. Senior faculty often have massive labs, dozens of researchers, heavy international travel commitments. They're operating at a much higher level of abstraction, almost like a CEO.
So they aren't going to look at your code.
Not at all. They're going to leave that low-level mentoring to their postdocs or senior PhD students. If a new student expects intense daily hand-holding from a post-tenure superstar, they're going to feel abandoned and frustrated.
And setting up those expectations goes hand in hand with some heavy early admin habits. Things like developing a preliminary project plan, creating a 6-month Gantt chart to visually map out your activities.
The Gantt chart is a lifesaver.
Yeah, and establishing strict research data management, or RDM. There is this non-negotiable rule here to save your entire PhD folder to an encrypted hard drive once a week without fail.
Essentially.
But I have to push back a little on this whole managing the boss concept. Isn't it incredibly intimidating to manage up in week one? I mean, how does a brand new, totally green student confidently walk into a renowned professor's office and start dictating meeting frequencies and bringing Gantt charts without seeming completely arrogant?
What's fascinating here is that taking control of the admin actually achieves the exact opposite of arrogance.
Really?
Yeah, put yourself in the supervisor's shoes. They are chronically overwhelmed. They're managing grant applications, teaching loads, peer reviews, multiple students simultaneously.
Sounds exhausting.
It is. So when a new student walks in and says, here's an agenda for our meeting, here are my notes from last time, and here's a visual chart of what I plan to do for the next 6 months, that does not read as arrogant. It reads as a massive relief.
So you're actively removing a cognitive burden from your boss.
Precisely. You're creating true symbiosis. By taking absolute responsibility for the logistics, you're freeing up your supervisor's mental bandwidth so they can focus purely on providing you with high-level intellectual guidance. You manage the framework, they provide the insight.
Okay, so you've built this administrative safety net. You have an encrypted drive, a meeting schedule, an aligned boss. But all that structure is completely useless if you don't actually know what you're trying to discover.
That's the scariest part.
Right. How do you find a problem worth solving when your mind is completely blank? Because the panic of month 2 definitely sets in when you realize you don't have a groundbreaking idea yet.
But forcing a groundbreaking idea in month 2 is just a guaranteed way to burn out. The brain needs raw material before it can synthesize something new.
And that's why the strategy for month 2 revolves around critical reading and low-stakes writing from day 1. It's about getting the gears turning before the pressure mounts. And there is a highly specific, very intentional tactic here, reading full, recently published PhD theses in your topic area.
Yeah, full theses.
Not just scanning the short journal articles, but sitting down and digesting the entire finished dissertation.
Which is something most students miss entirely. Journal articles are basically highlight reels. They're highly condensed, polished to a perfect shine, and they intentionally strip away all the messy scaffolding that went into the research.
They just show the clean results.
Exactly. A full thesis, on the other hand, shows you the actual architecture of the project. It reveals how a finished product is structured, how the arguments are framed and sustained over hundreds of pages, and the true intimidating scope of what's actually expected of you at the end of this journey.
And to complement that reading, you write a short literature review of a few thousand words and hand it to your supervisor for early feedback. It acts as this low-stakes way to calibrate your writing style and verify that you actually understand the core knowledge of the field.
Yes.
Because ultimately, month 2 isn't about making a massive discovery. It's about developing academic taste, learning the difference between a project that matters and what is known as a cockroach paper.
Oh, the cockroach paper. It is the ultimate trap of the outer loop.
Here's where it gets really interesting. A cockroach paper is defined as incremental work that just adds minor complexity to an existing idea for a tiny, almost irrelevant benchmark game. So are cockroach papers essentially the fast food of academia?
Very much, yeah.
Like, they're quick to make, extremely cheap, they satisfy a short-term craving for publication, but they completely lack the necessary intellectual nourishment to build a long-term, high-impact career.
That captures the dynamic perfectly. And the reason they are so universally tempting is tied directly back to those systemic pressures we discussed earlier.
The need to perform.
Exactly. When a student is floating in the void of the outer loop, feeling lost and incompetent, they crave a quick win to prove they belong. So they look at an existing successful model, tweak one minor parameter, maybe they run an old algorithm on a slightly new data set, and they publish the result.
And it survives peer review.
It survives peer review and gets published, hence the cockroach, right? It's impossible to kill because it is technically sound, but it doesn't actually move the field forward. It lacks ambition.
It's inner loop thinking disguised as outer loop research.
Yes.
You're just solving a tiny derivative of someone else's problem to get a dopamine hit.
You're avoiding the hard work of originality. Developing academic taste means learning to spot those incremental traps. It means having the courage to say, no, I'm going to hold out. I'm going to seek an ambitious problem where I have a viable angle of attack, even if it takes longer to get a win.
You really have to train your intellectual palate to reject the fast food.
So you're reading full theses, you're writing low-stakes reviews, you're refining your taste to avoid the fast food. And then, a third of a year in, day 100 arrives. This is the moment to stop, look in the mirror, and audit the foundation you've built.
Time for a reality check.
The strategy calls for a highly structured, brutally honest, personal SWOT analysis. Strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. Yeah, and a lot of people do SWOT analyses as this corporate buzzword exercise. But in a PhD, this has to be a forensic examination of your actual capabilities.
It breaks down into 4 specific evaluation areas. First is writing quality. Can you translate complex ideas clearly? And crucially, can you do it for both your peers and a lay audience?
Right.
Second, research techniques. Do you actually possess the methodologies you need? The mandate here is to learn and practice new research methods before you launch into deep research.
Because learning a technique while you're trying to conduct the actual experiment is a recipe for tainted data. You don't learn how to use a scalpel during an open-heart surgery.
I love that analogy. Third is language proficiency, specifically being comfortable with the high-level, nuanced academic English required for international conferences and publications.
Super important.
And fourth is evaluating your prior training versus your new project demands. Which brings up a terrifying scenario. What happens if a student sits down at day 100, conducts this honest SWOT analysis, and realizes they are completely underprepared?
It happens more than you'd think.
Like, what if their writing is a mess, their methodology is lacking, and their prior master's degree didn't train them for the demands of this new project at all? How does someone handle the absolute shock of realizing they lack fundamental skills 3 entire months into a multi-year program?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, experiencing that profound shock at day 100 is actually a massive victory. It doesn't feel like a victory, but it is.
Wait, how can realizing you are unqualified be a victory?
Because the alternative is experiencing that exact same shock at year 3. Think of a PhD like constructing a skyscraper. Day 100 is when you pour the concrete for the foundation and then inspect the blueprints one last time.
Okay.
If you find a massive crack in the concrete at day 100, it's stressful, but it's an easy patch. You just pour more concrete. But if you don't inspect it, build 30 stories of steel on top of it, and find the crack in year 3, you have to tear down the entire building.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that makes sense.
This audit is not a pass-fail test of your worthiness. It's a diagnostic tool. The output is an action document used to update your training and supervision plan, or TSP. You identify a gap, and you immediately enroll in a workshop, take an extra class, or complete a certificate to fill it.
Still, facing a massive gap in your skills is terrifying. Confronting your own weaknesses triggers deep anxiety, and that psychological toll transitions us into the final and perhaps most vital aspect of surviving the outer loop, managing the psychological marathon.
The cognitive and emotional endurance required to finish a PhD cannot be overstated. I mean, it is a test of stamina just as much as intellect.
And the first rule of this marathon is almost a relief to hear. No one expects you to know everything. You are there to learn, not to be a finished expert on day 1.
Exactly.
You have to dare to ask basic, fundamental questions. Stop trying to sound professional by asking overly complex, convoluted questions in seminars just to prove you belong in the room.
And that stems from the fear of looking foolish. But pretending to understand core concepts when you're actually lost will sabotage your entire project.
Because you build your research on a misunderstanding and it all collapses later.
Right.
A huge portion of that fear comes from comparison. Managing imposter syndrome means learning to aggressively ignore the braggers. We all know the type, the classmates who hold court in the break room, acting like they've understood advanced quantum mechanics or complex sociological frameworks since they were in kindergarten.
Academia is full of people projecting absolute certainty just to mask their own insecurity.
Right, and comparison is literally the thief of joy here, primarily because a PhD is, by definition, entirely original research.
Yeah.
You cannot compare your timeline to anyone else's because no one else is doing what you're doing. If you fail an experiment, it isn't a failure. It's a stepping stone because you're charting unknown territory. But sustaining that mindset requires strict physical boundaries, like aiming for 9 hours of sleep, eating proper warm meals. There's nothing cool or dedicated about munching on dry crackers at your desk all day.
No, there isn't.
Taking fresh air breaks, socializing with other PhDs so you don't become isolated in your own head.
Because the biological reality of the outer loop is intense. The cognitive load of unstructured problem solving is immense. Your brain is burning an incredible amount of energy trying to forge new neural pathways to solve problems that have literally never been solved before.
But let me point out a real-world contradiction here.
Okay.
The academic world, and honestly the tech and startup worlds too, heavily glorify the all-nighter. The hustle culture is celebrated. So how difficult is it to fiercely protect 9 hours of sleep and a warm lunch when the bragger at the desk next to you is loudly boasting about pulling a 24-hour shift in the lab? It feels like you aren't working hard enough.
It requires immense discipline and really a deep understanding of what actually produces quality work. Sacrificing sleep to spend 24 consecutive hours in a lab is almost always a proxy metric.
Explain that. What is a proxy metric?
A proxy metric is measuring the appearance of hard work instead of the output of good work. Being in a lab for 24 hours looks like dedication, but it's biologically counterproductive.
Because you're exhausted.
Exactly. When you are severely sleep-deprived, your prefrontal cortex, the exact part of your brain responsible for complex problem-solving, creativity, and maintaining that high-level academic taste, is severely compromised.
Wow.
You might be able to do repetitive inner-loop tasks while exhausted, like washing beakers or running basic code, but you cannot do high-level outer-loop synthesis.
So the person bragging about the all-nighter is likely producing low-quality incremental work.
Yep. They're probably writing a cockroach paper because they don't have the cognitive energy to tackle the ambitious problem. Protecting your sleep is protecting your most valuable research instrument, your own mind.
That perfectly echoes a closing quote used to summarize this mindset from AI researcher Andrei Karpathy. He says there are no shortcuts or cheats. You cannot game the system with proxy metrics. Focus on honest, high-quality research, communicate it clearly, and good things will inevitably happen.
It is a profound reminder that high-level research is not a game to be hacked. It's a transformation to be experienced.
To recap this incredible 100-day journey, you have to aggressively shift your mindset from the dopamine hits of the inner loop to the void of the outer loop.
Crucial step.
You must align with your supervisor's incentives and manage them by taking on the administrative burden of Gantt charts and agendas. You need to read full, messy theses and write early to develop an academic taste that fiercely rejects cockroach papers.
Skip the fast food.
Right. You have to be brave enough to conduct a brutal, honest SWOT analysis at day 100 to inspect your foundation and course correct. And above all, you have to protect your sleep, your health, and your sanity from the toxic hustle culture of proxy metrics.
And if you execute those steps, it means you're not just surviving the transition, you're laying an indestructible foundation for the next several years of your life.
So what does this all mean for you? Even if you aren't pursuing a doctorate, these principles apply anywhere. The next time you're handed a massive, unstructured project at work, or you decide to strike out and start your own business, remember this roadmap.
Absolutely.
Figure out your outer loop. Manage your stakeholders by relieving their cognitive burden. Audit your skills early before the building gets too high. And for goodness sake, stop eating crackers at your desk.
As you navigate those unstructured spaces in your own life, I want to leave you with one final thought to ponder.
Let's hear it.
We discussed how a PhD is entirely original research, which means you cannot compare your timeline to anyone else's. You are in the outer loop, hunting for new problems.
Hmm.
But the outer loop is theoretically infinite. There is always another question to ask, another variable to test, another angle to explore. So if there is no set recipe, no final exam to tell you you've passed, and no one to compare yourself to. Wait, no, let me rephrase that.
Yeah, go ahead.
If there's no one to compare yourself to, how does a researcher definitively know when their work is actually finished? Does the outer loop ever truly close?
Oh, man. If you're inventing the menu from scratch in an endless kitchen, how do you know when the meal is finally over? That is something to chew on.
Literally.
Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive into the first 100 days of a monumental transition. We hope you walk away with a clearer roadmap for whatever massive project you're tackling next. Keep questioning, keep exploring, and we will catch you next time.